Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Eat This, Drink That, ETDT, episode 7, because we just checked. And we have with us food expert, world's okayest chef, Ali Khan.
That's on my shirt.
And wine and beverage expert and all-around good guy, Steve Greer. And I am Ryan Crosby, and let's get started with today's episode. Ali, what's your Eat This for today?
You know, it's really funny because it has, as Steve just pointed out before we went live, we haven't been going for a bit. I've had 2 weeks to come up with something. But in all honesty, this topic is completely rushed into my head about 45 minutes ago. I was downstairs looking at my whiskey decanter. We all know what I'm talking about. One of those things you'd see in the soap opera or in the law office in the drama where, like, you know, the shady boss in the three-piece suit is like, here, give me your soul and you can have a sip of this drink. So here's the thing. The topic of today, coming from me, is how my whiskey decanter defeated capitalism. Now, I'll let that soak in for a second, because that's a lot, I understand, okay? I feel like when we first started this, and when Steve and I were conversing last fall, and I was like, I want a wine, but I don't want to spend a lot, I don't know what to do, I don't understand the label. See, here's the thing. The label is awesome, and the label is totally fucked up, right? And it totally guides and misleads us. Long after we've already spent the money, you can look at the label and go, oh, it's you. Yeah, I'll have you. Everything I thought about you when you're on the shelf, the decision I made, what I really value you for, the sticker and that label, it's all tied in there. So the other day, I got some whiskey, just the regular Buffalo Trace, right? Which, in all intents and purposes, pretty darn good whiskey. You know, if you're at a bar, it's
Fantastic.
Not the cheapest one. At a nice bar, they'll use it for mixing drinks, right? But at the store, Buffalo's never the one that really jumps at you unless you just do not look at anything above $30, right?
You have to be like craving it, I feel. You have to crave Buffalo Trace and go buy it intentionally.
Yes, because it's not like, oh, look what I found.
Right.
I found Coca-Cola. You know, you don't write that up. Like, oh, guys, I found a 2-liter Coca-Cola. It's like it's everywhere. And that's kind of the thing, right? However, I got that Buffalo Trace. I don't use my decanter often because I'm not a guy in a 3-piece suit in a law office asking you for your soul for a couple drinks. But I was like, I'm going to take this. As soon as I got the bottle, I popped her open, glug, 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 into the decanter, tossed the bottle away. It's just that decanter. It was so fun to just reach for that decanter and pour my drinks and stuff. And as I go downstairs and look at it, it's the middle of the week. I'm not touching it. You know, that's my thing. No sauce during the week. I'm looking at it. I'm like, man, that thing looks so cool. And the amazing thing is, I don't want to say it's just Buffalo Trace, but it's Buffalo Trace. It's really not that big of a deal. And it's so cool. It looks, it's a nice looking thing to have. And I don't look at it going, should I have bought that nose? Should I have spent that extra $16 or whatever the heck it is? It doesn't ever matter anyways. And I just like the idea of getting away from this whole marketed system of how the thing is, it's not about the taste. It's about how we choose, how we buy things, right? It's a big old mindfuck. And the decanter has removed it, and it's just defeated. Maybe it has defeated capitalism per se.
What, an equalizer?
Yes, yeah. But you know what? And maybe it has defeated capitalism because it's just leveled the playing field. It has basically erased marketing from my whiskey. And the funny thing is that if it was gut rot, nothing's gonna save that. You know what I mean? It's just saying, you know, you're a decent guy and you deserve a little bit better than what's been given to you. That's all I gotta say.
Defeating
I love
capitalism.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you I have
You
a
know,
I think I have a decanter like 4 feet away from me. It's like, wrapped up in like I don't use it. It's
Yeah, I get
wrapped
it.
up, but I have one and it's beautiful and and there is something regal about putting your mid-level liquor in there. You get a maker's mark or whatever and pour it in there and it tastes a little better or something.
Yes to everything you just said. You know what I mean? Yes to
Yeah.
everything you just said. Maybe the bottle's ghetto too. Maybe there's something to the fact that yes, I'm putting it in something nice, but there's something I don't know. Like we've talked about this a few times before, and I think the heart of this is the struggle as a consumer. You know what I mean? Am I spending too
yep.
much? Am I not spending enough? Am I shorting myself? Am I wasting my money? You know? Um, yeah. I mean, Greer,
Steve,
your
do you have a
who's
decanter for liquor?
So
here we go.
I do
Here we
not.
go. Here we go. Here we go. I mean, this was loaded. I teed this up for him. I'm watching. What was it? Not Jack Nicklaus. Phil Mickelson's about to win the freaking Masters right now. Just wait. Well,
I don't have a spirits decanter. I have a couple antique
Spirit.
looking decanters that I don't even use. Um, Decanters for spirits are exactly what Ali said. They are for appearance. Maybe its initial purpose isn't to wipe out, the label itself. So it elevates a, mid-tier spirit
Mhm.
to another
mhm.
level, which it really does. Um, it Everything oxidizes. Everything. So even when you crack the cap on a nice bottle of bourbon and pour yourself a glass and you put the cap back on, there is oxygen in there and it is oxidizing that liquid. It takes longer to oxidize a spirit than it does if you open up a bottle of wine and leave the cork out. Within a day or two, that wine's going to sour. It's going to be done. You have to do some
Like
preserving to the
would
wine.
it just taste bad, or would like the alcohol be like rendered?
So I'm not totally sure
You haven't
on
had it too often.
the alcohol does evaporate, but slowly. Alcohol does evaporate, but slowly.
Yeah.
Um, it dries out. It oxidizes. So if you have a nice bottle of wine, you have that first glass, and if you were to throw that in a decanter and leave it sit out, the fruit would go from bright, fresh, ripe to dried, sour, and flat. Everything would dissipate.
Yeah.
Spirits take a lot longer to do that. In the bottle, if it's in the bottle, there's very little oxygen because you're putting the cap back on. When it's in a decanter, you're going to have a higher volume of alcohol, depending on the shape and the size of the decanter.
Mhm.
What's the
I'm sorry,
seal
not
like on
alcohol,
yours,
of
Con?
oxygen.
Mine's like a glass seal, so there's probably more
Yeah.
air coming in than like
It's a glass. Yeah.
yeah,
It's a glass on glass,
glass on
as we
glass.
say in the
Yes.
decanter world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now I'm going to guess, a lot of the office guys in the three-piece suits are going through a handle a week in that office. So there's no time for it to oxidize.
Right.
And I'm also assuming that if it's something two, three, $400, suits would never decant that. They would want people to see
See the
that label
label.
and go, "Oh, wait a minute, where did you get the Pappy Van Winkle?"
Yeah.
Or "Where did you
Right.
get the Macallan 25?" They want people to see that. The idea is you decant. No one knows what the liquid is. A mid-tier quality is now elevated.
Hmm.
I,
No, let me
I,
tell you.
and it looks
Let
good.
me
It
tell
does
you,
look good.
this is the thing. As much as that's exactly what happened to me, and you know what? I'm not ashamed of having the Buffalo Trace bottle because it's freaking good. But what I
Yeah,
love
it
is
is.
that it's a treat. It's in this cool bottle, and you don't have to think about what someone could have spent and everything that goes into it. You know what I mean? I just think about how
Yep.
how that suit can kind of be like, check out my Dodgers mug that I got at the stadium, you know what I mean? Or more like Target. Like, you know, it obliterates it. It's just nice, and it just is what it is. Whether it's even like something that's beautiful or not, the fact that it's not just a label that usually has a sticker on it. I feel like there's something about that I like to remove in this pursuit that we're here to talk about, which is the pleasure of eating and drinking. You know what I mean? To just somehow take price out of the equation and just be like, this is lovely. I mean, it reminds me, you know, I mean, this is two terrible analogies. One was when Trump served fast food in the White House, and you're like, I mean, it is pretty wild to see like all that fast food like on, not in a car. You know, Wendy's is served in a car. Or in the restaurant, right? You know what I mean? or in Sideways when he's swishing that red wine in that foam cup. Just a juxtaposition right there. You know what I mean?
The Cheval Blanc.
Yeah.
He was drinking Cheval Blanc with his, I think he was eating a hamburger.
Oh, yeah. Don't eat that.
Steve, what whiskey would you throw in a decanter if you wanted to, upgrade? You know, if you wanted to take a $20 or $30 bottle and present it to someone.
Yeah, what are you hiding?
What would your...
So I think there's a fun tangent conversation here about you as an individual, because Eat This, Drink That is about elevating your pleasure in food and your pleasure in drink. But you as an individual, when you're standing in an aisle, hey, since we're on bourbon, let's talk about bourbon. Because bourbon's a very big deal. And most consumers are just standing there dumbfounded. What price do I have to spend? Can I get away with 20? Do I have to spend 50? What about that $150 bottle? Should I be buying that? Most consumers do not know, because really the most important thing, if you took the labels and price out of all of those, if you were to line up, or the store were to line up 15 bourbons for you to smell and slightly taste before you purchased, I don't know what you would go with. You might find that $75 bottle absolutely delicious and you're hooked and that's the only thing you're going to drink. Or a $20 bottle hits all the notes and it's perfect for you. But you would never know that until you did a range tasting. Pappy Van Bourbon is a big deal. I grew up in Cincinnati. Bourbon's kind of a thing for people in Kentucky and Cincinnati. I mean, it is everywhere, but there's some sort of birthright thing about.
You're close to the source, for sure.
We're right there. Yeah. You can, in an hour and a half, you're on the Bourbon Trail tasting bourbon.
Yeah.
Old Forester used to be our poker bourbon when we were 20, whatever.
Yo, call it right there. Steve Greer's poker bourbon is old. If that's not an endorsement, and by the way, I've had regular Old Forester. In fact, someone brought I don't even think the handle has a handle, but it's a big bottle. This is good.
Yeah. It is good. Yeah. And most people don't think about it. I went through a wild turkey phase in my early 20s. It's 101.
You don't need to be an average expert to say those words, by the way. I went through the wild turkey phase in my 20s.
I like wild turkey.
Greer's wild turkey phase. Which also took place in Kentucky and Cincinnati.
There were some bourbons, and now they're very expensive. Blanton's was my nice bourbon that I would always buy. There was always a bottle in the house that I would sip, and that's, you just pour a little bit and you sip and you kick back.
That's a classy looking bottle too. The bottle looks nice.
Yeah, it's a classy bottle. You line up the horses and it's the horses running from the starting gate to the finish. It spells out Blanton's. Very few people are able to get all of them. That was the first, I'm pretty sure, the first super premium single barrel bourbon that was put out in the market. I think in the early 80s, maybe the mid 80s.
I mean, the bottle looks like tacky furniture. Like it's you couldn't steal that. You couldn't be like, hey, let me walk it out and stick it in your ski jacket. You'll be like, what are you doing? I see the Blanton horse popping through your coat. Like it's just it's unstealable.
Yes, but they did make something collectible about it. So like the bottle is part of the drink. Like it's attached to it. I don't know if I would buy it if the bottle wasn't there. I wouldn't recognize it. It's just so part of it.
The secret bourbons, for people in the industry, for a long time was Elmer T. Lee. Elmer T. Lee was and is a really, really excellent bourbon.
Elmer T. Lee. And is this a straight whiskey? Is it?
Yeah, and you can't get this anymore, so it's gone. Oh. Just like Blanton's, you used to find Blanton's all the time. Very few people drank it. They're buying handles of McCormick bourbon. They're not buying, the tacky Blanton's bottle and sipping it at home. They're mixing it with, bourbon and Coke. Bourbon wasn't as big as it is now in the 90s and 2000s. Mm-hmm. Bourbon exploded somewhere around 2009, 2010, and it's just been meteoric ever since. There were some secret, Albert T. Lee was one of the secrets. There was an old Maker's Mark. It was a gold label. It was 101 proof. It disappeared out of the market in, I want to say, 92 or 93. It was only exported to Japan. All of it, Maker's Mark still made it. They just decided, you know what, we're going to make more money if we just send this to Japan. Wow. The Japanese were on the whiskey and bourbon train a lot sooner than Americans.
Yeah.
So in the 90s, the Japanese were already on all over high-end, high-quality bourbon. Four Roses was a secret one.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Four Roses was also taken out of the market and only went to Japan.
But you're saying a particular proof, a particular version of it?
Yeah. So, the single barrels are fantastic. He's a really cool distiller but that yellow label is inexpensive. I always have a bottle of Four Roses yellow label.
Yeah.
For a long time, a bunch of spirits buyers would turn their nose down to it. I think it was mainly because the old timers knew that they pulled it out of the market. I want to say Kieran Lager bought Four Roses. Wow. I could be way off base. But then it came back to the U.S. There is some very old bourbon in the yellow label that most people aren't even aware. I want to say I've heard rumors of 10-year-old bourbon go into that. But he does, I wasn't totally ready for a bourbon conversation, but I think he uses it's either 5 yeast strains and 2 mash bill recipes or vice versa. Right. So he literally is aging 10 different bourbons on top of the different areas of the warehouse treat the bourbon in a much different fashion. First floor bourbon might be a little cooler. Mm-hmm. You put it in the back corner on the 4th floor and it's really super hot and there's lots of play between the liquid and the wood. It's a completely different bourbon. That's why single barrels are such a big deal. This was aged in warehouse 22 on the 4th floor in the back corner next to it's not next to a fire, but it's very hot. They change the liquid, even though it starts off, a lot of distilleries just have one mash bill recipe, one set of yeast, boom, 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 it's in the barrel. This guy at Four Roses literally has 10 different bourbons out of the gate before it's even aging. Wow. So I think his stuff is really interesting. There was one single barrel. He also labels on there, it'll be a 4-letter code on Four Roses that you can look up and it'll tell you the mash bill recipe and the yeast.
Wow.
There was one that was so delicious that I have kept the empty bottle just so one day I might be able to find.
What's the code?
What's the code?
I'll get it. You know what? We'll send it out because I'll have to go take a picture of the bottle. But I kept the bottle.
So I'll toss this out there. Four Roses was, I definitely enjoy bourbon. I tend to find a bottle I like and I latch onto, usually around 40-ish or a little less, but 40 is usually a sweet spot. I feel very satisfied. Like, I didn't waste my time, didn't waste my money, whatever. I had Four Roses out at a bar. I'd heard a lot of great things about it. I'm pretty sure it was the yellow rose or the yellow whatever, label, whatever. I wasn't blown away by it. But I've heard so many consistent things about saying how it's good or whatever. So it's interesting to know there's certain codes out there. You know,
So not for the yellow label. The yellow label isn't coded. That is just a blend of everything in the warehouse, and that's like a Tuesday night bourbon. I'm not here
not even
to sit
worthy of
down
my
and
decanter.
yeah, I just want to kick back and throw a bourbon on the rocks. It's a fun bourbon just to have in the house to share with
Okay.
people. It's
I
inexpensive.
love the Old Forester answer. I want to go back to that. That was
Yeah, I mean that was our poker bourbon. So
it's
making old fashions, Manhattans, whatever. Four Roses Yellow Label is a perfect cocktail
what would you say?
bourbon.
It's pedestrian. It's like a pedestrian one, but the Old Forester was someplace.
Old Forester makes I don't know what you call it, their top bottling. I want to say it's called Presidential Choice. I can never ever find it. I've had it once. It was
It's like
phenomenal.
$100
Wow.
plus
Like
dollars,
that.
right? I mean, it's up there.
Yeah, and it's a weird, very decorative
Yeah, they have a
label.
couple different brands of Old Forester that I've seen.
Yeah, oh yeah. There's almost every bourbon company, bourbon label
Oh,
has a
different.
bunch. One distillery might have 50 different labels. There's also bourbon is built on contract distillation, so you can go to Kentucky and taste at the distillery, put a blend together, smack a label on it, and you're a bourbon producer. The best out of all I mean, there's got to be 1,000 different bourbons. I don't know the number, but Black Maple Hill, the old one that was in
These are
it's
all
gone.
just. I
It's
love
gone.
seeing Ollie write this down. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
gonna.
Sadly, this is
Oh,
gone.
this one's gone.
There was an old label. It was a guy up in, I think, Atherton, California. He just went to, I think it was Heaven Hill. He tasted a bunch of barrels. He put a blend together and he was selling this. It was a beautiful label. It looked like it was made from some guy in Lexington, and it was a beautiful label. Slender bottle, tall Bordeaux looking bottle. The bourbon sold for $20,
What?
and it was delicious. It slowly crept up.
Sure.
Like you could always find it for a while, and then it would come in 10 cases would drop in your store, and you better go buy it right then because it was gone in a week. And it slowly kept creeping up. And then Heaven Hill or whoever it was said, "You know what? We're making a lot of money on our bourbon. You can't have this anymore."
Oh, yeah.
So all of a sudden, that bourbon was gone. The bottle shape changed. They kept the label. They put it in a square bottle, and they started buying whiskey from Portland, Oregon. Raised the price, and I don't like slamming on things. It is not good. It is, yeah. So they're still
Lost the love and feeling.
making their name off of that label, but their original blend that he was getting was delicious. I think it's important to talk about why bourbons can taste so different. A lot has to do with the mash bill recipes and the yeast strain. But mash bill recipes just mean it has to be majority corn, right?
Okay.
It has to. That's a legal obligation. It has to be 100% new heavy charred oak. But your second and third grain, there's no regulation on that. So corn is the majority. That's a sweeter texture. But then you use wheat, which has more of a creamy. I'm a wheat person. I like the second grain to be high in wheat. And then there's rye. So rye adds a very spicy note. So
So there's rye whiskey.
bourbon producers will be a heavy second grain will be rye, or it'll be heavy second grain wheat.
All right, let
Even
me hit you
in
with
one,
this because it's funny. You have a way of like dropping in all this knowledge that the habit is to nod. But the thing is, some people are going to be like, "Hang on, can we start at the basics? Give me the brown booze 101, and just call me out when I'm wrong. Corn, bourbon,
yep,
wheat, Scotch, rye,
nope,
rye. I mean,
Yeah, rye is rye.
that's it.
And rye, I think it started in Pennsylvania. I'm not totally sure on the history. Rye was, obviously, it was rye. It might have been the very first whiskey produced in the U.S.
Mhm.
Um, it's a spicy, Canadians love rye
Oh,
whiskey, so there's a
Canadian
lot of rye
whiskey.
up in Canada. I am not a huge fan. I know this, people will be angry that I say this. I'm not a huge rye guy. It's just a little too spicy and too dry for me, too astringent. Scotch is barley
Oh, okay.
and it's malted.
Okay.
So
Barley,
just like
not
think,
wheat.
yeah,
Barley.
it's not
Okay.
wheat. We use wheat, and then vodka producers will use wheat and rye and grapes, and you can make vodka out of almost
Okay.
anything. But Scotch is malted barley. Irish whiskey is unmalted and malted combo, and it's a blend. Scotch used to really just be a whole bunch of blends, and then single malts started taking off because the independent bottlers, especially in London, would just go up and try a bunch of casks, and all those casks were going into a bunch of different blended scotches. Think Dewar's, but they would
Dewar's.
go up and say, "Man, I really like that cask. I want to buy it." Okay, that cask is a 23-year-old Mortlock, distilled in 1973. And so this independent bottler would put on the label, bottled by such and such. And in the bottle is this 1973 Mortlock, whatever, da 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 da. Single malt started taking off.
So that's what single
So
malt is.
now,
Single malt is, everything in this barrel is coming from one thing, right?
yep, one distillery, one single
Okay.
place. Um, That's all it means. It's a single malt from that distillery. It's distilled there. The shapes of the stills matter in Scotland. You might have a really tall one like Glenmorangie, and then Mortlock, which is one of my favorites, has the wee still. It's very small. So the neck shape and everything will change how these distillates are going up, 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 up. So if you allow all these heavier distillates to go through without being redistilled, it's going to be a meatier, heavier, oilier textured
Oily.
whiskey.
Yes.
Mortlock is like
Meaty
Mortlock is
and
like
oily.
beef
This is
broth.
crazy. It's like
And
he's
Yes.
then,
talking about cod. I
but then
mean,
Yeah.
the most like the obviously the most popular whiskey on the basic level, I feel like are kind of the sour mash brands, right? Like the Jack Daniels or the Evan Williams.
Jack Daniels is, I think, the number
Yeah.
one
And so
spirit in the
that's considered
world.
sour mash. I always thought that was an interesting descriptor.
And they charcoal filter
Okay.
too. They produce their own charcoal there at the distillery, and they charcoal filter the spirit, and
I
then
think
it
Old
goes
Forester has a
into
good
the
sour
barrel.
mash too. Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. Dickel's also down in Tennessee, but that's Tennessee whiskey.
Okay.
For some reason, it's very important to think about protected origins. So Scotch is protected. Um,
Champagne or whatever.
Different AOCs in wine are protected. Tequila, mezcal, raicilla. I think all the agave spirits are now protected. I think the fifth one just went into Bacanora and Sotal are all protected. The French and Mexican government have been really, they've been working together very closely since the 70s. So everything is signed off on a treaty for intellectual property. And so those are all protected. For some reason, the Kentuckians have never protected or you can use the word bourbon anywhere you
Hmm.
want. Bourbon doesn't have to just be produced in
mm,
Kentucky, but it does have to be uh, corn and 100% new oak, charred, heavy charred. So that fire is roasting the inside of the barrel, and that's where a lot of the flavor is coming from. So you have this sweet, high alcohol, sweet new make spirit. It's going into the wood. It's going through hot Kentucky summers, back and forth for, most are 4-year old. You can go up. I prefer 10-year-old bourbons. And then, of course, there's Pappy 15 and 23. But that play between that heavy char wood and the spirit changes the flavor. In Scotland, they're using old barrels. They could use sherry. They could use bourbon. They could use anything they wanted. And it sits in that old barrel, so there's not as much play going back and forth. Um, that changes that style of
Oh, wow.
the spirit just by it's not aging in 100% new oak. There are some people that have played around with, virgin oak and 100% new fired oak, and it changes the scotch completely. Um, so it's not just what it's being made from, it's how it's being aged. And your temperatures in Scotland are totally different than your
Oh,
temperatures
Yeah.
in
Kentucky,
Kentucky.
right?
So it's much more mild. There's not a lot of interplay in heat exchange going through
So what
the
does
barrels in
he do
Scotland.
to like the alcohol and the taste? Because you were saying like,
Well,
oh, this is a
so
hot spot, this is a cold spot. I mean, what's ideal? I mean, I feel like wine. Yeah, I know wine. You store it in a pretty cool place. That seems to maybe keep change away. But like,
yeah,
what's the
yeah.
upside and downside to?
So your the wood pulls in the liquid further the hotter it gets because everything is expanding and the liquid's going into the wood and then it's
So
contracting
when
and
it's hotter, you
settling
get
back out.
more of a taste in the barrel, more of that.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
like
yeah,
it.
yeah. And
I like
Angel's share will change too with the heat because you're. I think it's 2%, maybe it's 1%. You're losing to Angel's share. I really hate that word,
what
um,
you lose the
but
booze. Just
it's evaporating.
mm.
Things are
Angel share.
evaporating, and it's termed the
Angel
Angel's share
share.
because you can imagine the angels sitting around getting drunk on
I'm gonna
bourbon.
use that
Sounds like a
for
toilet
sure.
paper brand.
Next time something's missing, I'm gonna be like, oh, it's the angel share. Like they
I
took
need
Yeah,
another roll of
yeah.
angel share.
So that's your basic rundown on brown spirits.
Okay.
It's really easy.
Okay.
There's this. I don't want to call it a cereal quality to Irish whiskey, but because they're using unmalted and malted, there's a different flavor to Irish whiskeys, which I'm sure you guys have had Jameson or Bushmills. Tastes completely different than a Scotch whiskey
Oh,
or a single
tastes like
malt
a rough
whiskey.
evening is what
Um,
it tastes like. Ugh.
Ollie, I wonder.
yeah, so I mean that's the simple. But back to what? How do you know what to get and what price point
Yeah,
to buy
yeah,
at? Sadly, stores don't do
yeah.
lineups of whiskeys for you to sit around and try. You have to go to a really good whiskey bar, and almost all bars have because bourbon is so
Hmm.
popular. You can go in and probably try, a flight of four, and then go back again, try another flight of four. You don't have to follow the collectors and the I don't know the culture of bourbon and try to. You can't find Blanton's anymore. I've never see Elmer T. Lee anymore.
Bland's is
The
very
most
rarely.
sought after ones, the Pappy Van Winkles, actually come from the Buffalo Trace
Oh,
Distillery.
Yeah.
So Buffalo Trace, I don't know the exact number, but I'm going to throw out 30 different bourbons that they all make
oh
inside
wow.
Buffalo Trace. So mash bills change, yeast change, aging, all that stuff. Um, but they all produce. George T. Stagg comes from there. There's a whole antique collection that
Wow.
comes out of Buffalo Trace. Then Buffalo Trace does a whole line of experimental, like that they'll sell in little 375s. So you can try different Buffalo Trace versions. Yeah, there's a whole world to bourbon. And if you're not on the inside, it's easy to get lost and try
You
to
know,
find something
I,
that really isn't there.
I'm gonna give you the 180 on this. This is probably like why I like bourbon so much, and I don't stress. And here's the thing, I don't stress it. And this is gonna be the slam on this. Someone
All
gonna
right.
slam the door on this. This
Slam
is
it
gonna
in.
be the DT. This is Ali's DT.
All
Drink
right.
this.
Yes.
In all honesty, I have less of a fail rate with whiskey if I stick to a certain price point and bourbon. Like if I go in and go, I am going to spend around $40. It could be Balcones, Baby Blue. It could be
Yep.
Rowan's Creek, which is on the hot side. I'm a fan of the Old Forester 1870 small batch. Like these are all like
Nice.
around that
Yep.
40. But my neighbor who just moved out gave me a bottle of Basil Hayden. Good old Basil Hayden. In fact,
Yeah.
it's so good and
Nice
kind
good.
of everywhere in a fair price that I almost kind of get bored of it because I've had it so much. But
Oh,
it
really?
is pretty much, honestly, I mean, this is when you use that term pound for pound, the best fighter in the world. Part of me should just say, you know what? It's all good. I can always get a Buffalo to stick in the decanter, get a Basil Hayden. It's never a bad call. And it'll be okay. You know, for some reason
Right.
with wine, there's so much more variance.
Yeah.
My mood changes, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, I swear, you know, for me, putting my bet on a $40 bourbon at the liquor store is like going to the ponies and betting on a horse to show. I'm gonna get some out of it. Just
Love
saying.
it.
Well,
Love it.
We've kind of talked about this before. I know we're probably close to wrapping up. So how are we doing on time,
We're
Ryan?
getting close to wrapping up. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll make one last point because that's a really good second tangent to go. Why is it so difficult to have that same success rate with wine? Because wine has such a high variability. No, the differences in wine can change drastically from region to region, grape to grape, winemaker to winemaker, vintage to vintage. A Pinot Noir from New Zealand or Australia is going to taste completely different than a Russian River or Sonoma Coast or Santa Rita Hills in California or in Oregon or a Burgundy, even a Pinot Noir from Italy in the mountains or a German Pinot Noir. Completely different. Then you have price points, quality of the vineyard sources, quality how much those grapes cost, and then the winemaker's influence. You are really just chucking dice blind with wine.
Dang, wow.
You really are.
Straight up.
Yeah, you really are. There's just the variables are so high. You have to. That's why when somebody discovers a wine like Prisoner, when Prisoner I think came out in 07 or 08, it had the really cool label. It was maybe $30. It's Zinfandel based, so rich fruit, sweet, higher alcohol. It just started hitting all the notes for so many people. It exploded.
Yeah.
So then it became a case of there wasn't enough Prisoner. So the price kept creeping up. I think it got up to like 40. When it came in, everybody was on a waiting list. They would just come in and buy cases. I'm out.
Yeah.
And that's all these people drink. And that's because it is so difficult unless you have your wine store like you had with K&L when you would come in and see me and we could walk around the store and I'm going to spend $20 today and I don't feel like Pinot Noir, I want a cab. You can discover things. And especially if that person's able to translate your flavor requirements and the price point, they can get you in the right bottle. It takes a little more effort than with vodka, tequila, bourbons. You pretty much know what you're going to get, especially at certain price points.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Plus
you
the-
spend $20
the
on a
ingredients,
cheap
too.
tequila, it's going to taste cheap. If you spend $40 on a tequila,
Would you
it's
ever
usually going to be really good.
Does tequila go in a decanter? I mean, I can't think I've ever had it in a decanter. No.
I love this decanter
Yeah.
topic because it just looks good. That is the only reason.
What would be weird is putting a clear liquid
Yes,
in
you
a
wouldn't do it.
decanter. That would kind of be, for some reason, that strikes me as like, why?
So, like, if you want to, I see. So we're leaving the gins and the vodkas all in their bottles. Like, what would be
Yeah.
the one? What's that yellow, like Gordon's gin or something? You know, that everyone has sort of in their bar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess
Beefeater.
I guess you see the Tanqueray and the Bombay sitting there, but then the bourbons can be decanted.
Yeah, it's weird.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a whole other thing.
This was a good topic, Ali. We'll cover. We can dive into wine down the road. Where how do you pick a bottle? but it is a totally different experience shopping for spirits and
Yeah,
wine.
landmines.
Yeah.
Let's wrap up episode 7 here, guys, for Eat This, Drink That, ETDT.
Thanks, gents.
This episode, Ollie has defeated capitalism with his decanter.
I did. I really
think you did.
maybe even this podcast, because you don't need to listen to it anymore when it comes to bourbon.
See you soon. Thanks.
Sorry.
All right, guys. Great to see you.
Ciao.